Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to Bendy and the Ink Machine.
Welcome to Poppy Playtime.
Garten of Ban. Got it. Bam, I did it. I think it's my chance. Maybe. Oh.
In these clips, Markiplier is going through the standard Mascot horror chore of finding objects and pressing E over and over again to advance the game. Typically, when Markiplier plays through these sections, you can pinpoint the time where his soul leaves his body, leaving only a lifeless husk behind. However, in the new FNAF game, Ruin, things are different. Even though he's still just walking around and pressing E, Markiplier is alive again. Why? Because the developers at Steel Wool Studios found a way to make walking around and pressing E actually fun.
Oh, wait a minute! Hey, leave! You need to go!
And I believe Ruin's new approach to looking around and pressing E is the key to bringing the Mascot horror genre back to its former glory. I'm dead serious, let me explain. To show what makes Ruin different from its competitors in the Mascot horror genre, we need to break down the standard Mascot horror formula and see how it compares to Ruin. Bendy and the Ink Machine seem to be the start of this linear E-based gameplay trend. Chapter 1 of the game is just light scares, find the item room, get items with E, place items with E, chase scene, repeat for the next chapter. Poppy Playtime 1, light scares, find the item room, solve light puzzles, place items with E, chase scene, ban, scares, E, chase scene. Now, each of these games do get a bit more complex in their next chapters, but not much more complex. Instead of just picking up items, the most basic stealth, puzzle, or combat sections are sometimes incorporated to mix up the gameplay. But the core loop of explore, E, and chase generally stays the same. No core mechanics develop over time, and the games often feel like a pile of shallow minigames. In a standard horror game or video game in general, you'll have some sort of core gameplay system that builds up over time, like an advanced movement or combat system. A lot of fear in modern horror game gameplay is built from having you lose resources for those systems over time. They make you feel unprepared for what's ahead, as your health, ammo, and sometimes sanity start to dwindle with no chance of recovery. The gameplay also becomes more intense over time, since more and more elements get added to the basic running and shooting mechanics, till the mechanics reach a wonderful crescendo final test with a final boss, and these E-based Mascot horror games have none of that. The whole genre, and even now FNAF Ruin, seems to be under a set of unwritten rules that cannot be broken. First, the player can't have anything but standard movement. The player can't have a weapon, the player can't have an inventory of consumable resources, and the player doesn't have health, they just die. And frankly, a few of these rules make sense. Without any weapon, the player feels completely powerless. These games live and die off YouTube, so long sections to explore complex mechanics, sort an inventory, or even to just regain health are less preferable to more cinematic and varied content. When Security Breach came out, it tried not to fall under these rules or patterns, and it had a few gameplay systems that were at least varied. However, after the bad stealth and Freddy Fazglock gameplay failed, Steel Wool decided to conform to these E-based gameplay rules for Ruin, but they did one key thing differently.
Hello there.
When Ruin starts, you get your usual linear scripted scares and random minigames, but things change when you get to these security nodes. The first one is your ever so familiar press E challenge. Press E on a few things, return to the main thing, press E, unlock the path forward. But for the second security node onward, they add this guy, Mexus. Now from here on out, whenever you're hunting down objects and pressing E, this murder rabbit will randomly appear in a very inconvenient spot and slowly warp toward you. If he catches up to you, he'll teleport in an enemy, and most of the time this means you just instantly die. This alone immediately accomplishes two very important things. One, Mexus adds a timer to the E object hunt, so you can't just take your sweet time. You have to be constantly on the move and watching your back. Two, Mexus forces you to move carefully. Since he teleports at inconvenient places, you have to be careful to not run into him, but you can also move to lure him away from your objective and then dash over to your goal to buy yourself more time. Now the player is still simply moving around and pressing E, but Mexus alone makes the gameplay of Ruin so much stronger than all the other E-based games in this genre. Because in Ruin, these E sections are very directly connected to the horror instead of separated from from it. Poppy Playtime has these neat electrical puzzles that do actually develop and gain complexity over time, but these puzzles feel like a different game shoved into the main game to pad out the scares and chases, because there is no horror with them. In Poppy Playtime and everything else, you're perfectly safe until the chase starts, but in Ruin, you're rarely ever safe. But that's not where the better E gameplay ends in Ruin. Oh no. Things get even better. What Steel Wool does is it takes some minigame elements from the previous game and layers them on top of the Mexus system. First, we get these bear endos, which only move when you're not looking at them. Immediately adding about 10 of them to an objective instead of like 1 or 2 is way too harsh at the beginning of the game, but this introduces the idea of having to find items while keeping track of 2 or more entities. So you need to lure the constantly moving Mexus and bear endos away before getting to your objective, and you need to keep a mental map of both their movement behaviors in your mind while moving around yourself. This pattern continues when normal animatronics are added to the mix. These animatronics each have set paths they walk in, so you have to learn that pattern and find the best time to sneak in an area and search while also keeping Mexus at bay. Next, you get audio lures to distract animatronics, and in the final stretch of the game, you have to combine several of these elements at each security nodes section by luring away the Music Men clump, keeping Mexus at bay, and watching carefully for rogue Music Men so you don't get too close to them all at the same time. And oh my goodness, wait a second, what is this? A mechanic with actual increasing complexity and depth snuck into a game where all you do is walk around and press E.
Oh, this is beautiful.
Now, even though just having an actual developing gameplay loop puts Ruin leaps and bounds above its Mascot horror competitors, the game isn't perfect. People have mainly had just one complaint about Ruin's core gameplay loop, and that is, even though it's fun, the node-breaching gameplay gets repetitive. So does this mean games in the Mascot horror genre should just have a bunch of E mini-games without depth instead of a developing gameplay loop? I don't think so. I am confident that all Steel Wool needs to do is just mash together this evolving gameplay loop with hyper variety a bit more to get something perfect which still keeps eyes on YouTube screens. Let's look at the system we have right now. Mostly, you have to check Mexus, lure him away and run if he's too close, check the outer animatronic and use the camera to lure if they are too close, then you switch to your task of finding the nodes without running into rogue Music Men. I think people are complaining about repetition because the gameplay doesn't go beyond this point, and it very literally repeats without much variety. In the last section I mentioned, you have 4 node puzzles with these Music Men, and they're all beaten in the exact same way. I think Steel Wool should have gone a bit further with what they had, especially at the end. They could have added Freddy here, who has a path but isn't affected by the lures, and put a bear endo or 2 in the final sections instead of, 10 right at the beginning. I'm still not over that. In other words, instead of checking the states of just 2 unique animatronics and doing your main task if they are distracted, I think over the course of the game, they should add in or swap out around, let's say, 4 animatronics. Kinda like in that one indie game from years ago, Five Nights at Freddy's. I think I see what the gameplay loop of Ruin was inspired by. And honestly, I think just looking more at these original FNAF games and applying their template but in 3D might be the key to make non-combat based evolving horror mechanics. It had you focus on a main task, but every so often check if an enemy was close. If it was, you'd repel them, and then get back to your main task. In FNAF 1, this main task was just sitting there and conserving power, but eventually by FNAF 6, we got a formula where instead of waiting, you needed to complete a list of on-screen tasks while watching out for a variety of foes. And Ruin is already halfway there to applying that 2D sit and survive structure framework to the 3D E-based game Ruin, with our main task being find the buttons, but before we do that, we have to do our checks of if Mexus is close, repel by moving, and if the animatronic is close, repel by camera lure. Steel Wool just needs to steal a bit more from the original games and add in more threats. Let's add in AI Freddles, for example. What could happen is while you're doing your main task, if you hear the audio cue, you have to immediately stop, look for the Freddle, and press E to send him away. Or maybe there's a music box in the sky that you have to look up at and press E to wind up, but looking up won't let you see a bear endo coming at you.
Hello there.
Adding in and dropping out different checks and threats could add a lot more variety and challenge to a gameplay loop that only involves looking around and pressing E. In fact, I am 100% confident that this would make Ruin a better game, and I believe other Mascot horror games can copy this structure because there is already another game which is built on this E-based with threats format. While Ruin was being developed, you might have heard of the phenomenal free FNAF fan game, The Glitched Attraction. It's like a smaller FNAF Ruin with more animatronics. Each level is an escape room with 1 to 6 unique threats in each level. To pass each room, you must complete your task while constantly checking up on invading enemies and listening for audio cues. Now, admittedly, most of the game's main tasks involve just sitting there at a screen, so you don't really get that full 3D objective experience that Ruin offers, except in one level, Gears, where the main objective is just walking around and pressing E on gears to collect them, then putting them in a machine. Mascot Horror 101. But what makes Glitched Attraction different is you have to time your searches with Chica's walking path, watch out for the cupcake, listen for Mangle on the ceiling, and keep the music box wound up. Ruin is basically this, but just on a bigger map with less threats. They both have this evolved E-based gameplay with threat structure that I want every other Mascot horror game to learn from. So here's my message to any Mascot horror devs out there. Please take these two pieces from Ruin and Glitched Attraction to make your game's E sections not lifeless and miserable. I want Markiplier to have his soul. First, if you're having the player search for objects and pressing E, put a timer on that action. Heck, even Polymar's sussy Schoolgrounds was smart enough to put collecting the objects on a timer. So please, for the love of any dignity this genre may have left, be better than sussy Schoolgrounds. Secondly, have checks the player has to do or time correctly in the background of the main task. Like if the player hears an audio cue while searching for gears, they have to hide in a locker or the monster will get them. If you know me or my channel, you know I've been gone for years. Yes, because I've been working on Games for Non-Gamers, a channel where I'm going to try to teach your parents how to play FNAF Ruin, by the way, but also because the Mascot horror genre has been so devoid of interesting gameplay ideas, I haven't had anything to comment on for years. But Ruin shows that we can put gameplay depth into this genre. I think these two rules are a great starting point for making a non-combat horror game with depth. But above following any specific rules, I believe developers just need to keep experimenting. When original FNAF developer Scott Cawthon practically created the new sit and survive genre, he kept on experimenting with the core loop of his games till he found the perfect formula. And I think we're seeing the same journey with the next bearers of the torch, Steelwool Studios. I believe that just like Scott before them, with enough time and creativity, Steelwool can perfect this new E-based with threats, non-combat horror genre. I'm looking forward to seeing the next chapter in their journey, because with just Ruin, they've inspired me to make content again after years. Anyway, click here if you want to watch my video about Scott Cawthon making the perfect FNAF gameplay loop, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the flip side.